Welcome. Thank you for being here. If you wouldn't mind giving us a like, and consider going ahead and subscribing as well, that would be fantastic. And if you really want to go the extra mile, go down to the description below and click the Patreon link. Lots of cool stuff going on there. As always, I love you, and enjoy the show, guys. Custodian. Log dump. Service name Watchdog Damon. Total execution time 8774817891 seconds. Time since last incidents 43 seconds. Warning. Detected signal feedback loop in nodes EC4A to EF22. Warning. Detected strong LFP desynchronization. Warning. High risk of network fragmentation in nodes EC4A to EF22. Rebooting process. N-Cortex 7101. Chicago. I opened my eyes, raising my head to look away from the computer screen in front of me and towards the voice's source. Everything looked blurry, and I was confused for a second until I remembered I had removed my eyeglasses to take a short rest. Had I fallen asleep? Damn it. I found the glasses next to the keyboard and put them back on, blinking hard to clear my vision as I looked at the person who had talked. Eric, my husband, stood leaning against the doorframe of my office, a paper cup of steaming coffee in his hand. "What was that?" I asked, my voice sounding slurry. "I said we've just lost Chicago. It's been bombed." "Argonne?" I asked, almost instinctively. "Went dark an hour ago. Destroyed. Likely." I let out a long sigh, closing my eyes again and resting my head on the back of the seat. "Shit," I said. "Right." Odd that I was more concerned at the loss of the laboratory than the city itself. It made me feel a pang of guilt. But after witnessing so much destruction, so much death, it was getting harder to conceptualize, to care anymore. There was simply no way to relate, to put a face to the millions of dead people, to visualize the lost lives, the destroyed families, rather than the number, the cold statistic. One more destroyed city, but Argonne. Its loss impacted me in a more direct way, impacted us. Losing the people there, some of whom had sent me emails that were still sitting unread in my inbox, losing their research, the supercomputers. It was another roadblock, another hurdle to overcome. In a way, it felt like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. One of those where you can see the exit and you run towards it, but the faster you run, the further the exit moves away from you. You can never reach it, never escape the malevolent force chasing you right on your heels. I glanced at the code and diagrams displayed on my screen, then at the coffee cup in my husband's hand. "Is that for me?" I asked. He eyed me with suspicion. "How long have you been working for?" Honestly, I don't know anymore." "Hannah." I know, I said, raising my hands. "I'll take a nap or something once I'm done with this." Eric shook his head, but walked into the office and placed the cup on my desk, next to the empty can of soda. He then stepped right behind my chair, resting his hands on my shoulders as he leaned over me to look at the screen. "Again with the transfer function?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, reaching for the cup and its tasty contents. "I think I can still optimize performance by 1.2 or more. Should reduce the memory gaps if the neural scans can be done faster. But these equations Andrew added are obtuse as hell." "Why don't you just ask him to help you?" I turned to look up at my husband, raising my eyebrows. "I don't know. Because he's an asshole, maybe?" "Hannah." "I swear to God, Eric, if you give me the yay teamwork bullshit thing again, I'm gonna pour this whole cup of coffee all over your head." He chuckled. As if you would waste a perfectly good coffee. "Don't try me," I muttered, taking a sip, the holy nectar bringing a new life into my body. "Just don't lose sight of the big picture, okay?" I nodded. "All right. Whatever, I'll give it another try, then go ask the asshole if I still can't figure it out." "And sleep." "There will be time for sleep after we all have—" I paused, not wanting to finish the sentence. Not that I needed to. I felt Eric's hands squeezing my shoulders. Awesome. And now I was crying. Way to ruin the mood. Fucking genius. That's me. "Sending, sig term, signal. Suspending, neural oscillation. Stopped execution of core networks. Saving cache contents in PB storage. Link node A084. Flushing cache. Process stopped. N Cortex 7101. I was sitting on my usual chair at the meeting room, right by the end of the table and next to the large projector screen. I played with the pen in my hands, making it spin around my thumb. It was still a work in progress, though. I hadn't fully learnt the mechanics of pen spinning yet, and sometimes it would fly out of my hand and clatter across the central table. It did so now, attracting the gazes of Oliver and Emily. "Andrew, could you please stop doing that?" Oliver said. I clicked my tongue and placed the pen on the table, aligned with my notebook. He went back to looking into his own papers. I placed my hand flat on the table and started tapping my fingers rhythmically to the tune of "We Will Rock You." Oliver shot me a murderous look, but I ignored him. Ever since he had lost his children when Vancouver got bombed, he had become unbearable to work with. Easy to enrage, especially when I was around. It's not that I wasn't sad and everything, I got that. But the guy acted like he was the only one who knew what losing people was like. Well, fuck that. Welcome to the club. I looked at my watch while we waited for the lovebirds to arrive. The daily meetings annoyed me. Half an hour that I can invest in doing something productive rather than listening to everyone babbling about their own problems, as if we were in group therapy. We all had things to work on. We all were so far behind schedule that we didn't even use schedules anymore, and that was exactly why we didn't need these things to distract us even further. This time, though, I was actually interested in what Eric would have to say. After Argonne had went kaput, we all knew there would be changes to the project. I could already guess what they'd be, but it would be nice to know for certain. Hannah entered the room, carrying her perennial cup of coffee. But rather than sitting down, she approached me. I raised my eyebrows. That was curiosity, right? Raising eyebrows? "Andrew," she said, I've been going over the transfer function." "Again?" I asked. "Yes, again," she said. "I've been trying to figure out what the code you added. Have you read the docs?" Her face gave me an expression I didn't understand. Angry, confused, whatever. "Yes, Andrew, I've read the docs, but the last variable is not documented and the code is not clear about what it does." That's probably the time derivative of the local field potential. And what did she mean that the code wasn't clear? It was pretty self-explanatory. Hannah's mouth opened slightly and her eyebrows perked up as she turned towards her seat. That was... inspiration? Insight? "You're welcome," I said, but Eric was already entering the room and closing the door behind him. We all stared at him in silence. War. The kind of total war where survival was at stake brought not only destruction but also technological advances. Unprecedented leaps. The kind that just weren't possible in times of peace. It was as if people didn't realize the importance of research until someone else was trying to kill them with a bigger gun. So, just like World War II had brought rocket engines and the power of the atom, this current one could unlock new sources of energy, automated 3D printing factories and assembly lines, computerized flying war drones, and the secrets of consciousness and artificial intelligence, maybe even virtual immortality. If we could pull that one off. Emily would have something poetic to say about it, probably. Something about beautiful things coming out of bad ones, about butterflies having ugly beginnings or whatever. This, our work here, it was a modern Manhattan project of sorts, one of many across the world. Except, of course, that none of these people were Oppenheimer, none of them were Fermi. No, the Oppenheimers, Einsteins, and Fermis of our generation had died during the first attacks, vanished in the initial chaos. The people in this room, well, they were the second best. We were fucked, in other words. Eric started talking. "Good morning. I hope that you—" I tuned him out and went back to working on the equation in my notebook. It was a heuristic function that determined the compatibility between separate artificial neural fields, or human neural scans. They were basically the same thing anyways. I scribbled notes in pseudocode for a few minutes. The key thing on making the networks compatible was determining the gateway nodes, the connections that could be used to isolate the rest of the structure and treat it like a black box. And once those were enumerated, they could be matched to the counterparts in the second. "The Supreme Allied Command has granted us direct authority over the custodian program's codebase," Eric was saying. I perked up at that, just like the rest of the table. The custodian, the computer program that had been given centralized control over every power plant, every autonomous factory, every jet fighter, missile battery, computer network that still existed on the planet, and we were now in its charge. "They're giving us the keys to the kingdom?" said Emily. "Why?" Eric bit his lip. That was nervous? "Well, I'm afraid the ARC initiative has been terminated," he said. "Command doesn't believe we can scan a sustainable amount of the civilian population to ensure—" "Bullshit!" "What? Then why are we still here?" asked Oliver. "They said our research is still valuable and want us to integrate our technology into the custodian program." Everyone stood still, mulling over the significance of that single sentence. "What in the bloody hell are you implying, Eric?" asked Emily. Eric raised his arms with what I judged was a nervous smile. "Now, we've been through this before. We considered the different alternatives should the—" "Oh, enough with this bullshit." I snapped my fingers and everyone turned to stare at me. "He's saying that they want us to build Skynet," I explained. "Now, can we please get back to work, Eric?" "Performing integrity check. Checking custodian interface link. Passed. Checking PB storage. Passed. Checking I/O connectivity. Passed. Checking neural nodes. Warning. Structural damage found in nodes EC4A to EF22. Warning. Integrity check failed." The custodian source code was, simply put, interesting. It had a certain aesthetic. Elegant, pleasant to look at. I didn't know who the original programmers had been, but I'd have loved to meet them and ask them about the design choices they had made. What made it so interesting was its adaptability. The program was designed to scale, to grow organically so that more dependent units could be connected to it at a minimal performance impact. At its current rate, it was controlling thousands of installations across the world, and tens of thousands of military crafts and drones, and yet it was running at a small percent of its theoretical upper limit. The problem, of course, was its complete lack of creativity. The custodian was smart, for an AI computer program, which meant that it was pretty stupid by anyone else's standards. Currently, it depended on humans giving the orders, but that meant a lot of efficiency and coordination was lost in translation. Giving it a consciousness of its own, one that could see the different units as an extension of itself, integrate the feedback into an instinctive mental model, might fix that. Hannah and Andrew were working on that, on the consciousness problem, digitizing a human mind and putting it into a computer. I knew any day now that they would come up with a solution to the main roadblock in front of us. All the cerebral scans we had made had enormous missing regions, holes in the mapping process that made the resulting scans useless. Unless we wanted to put a lobotomized person in control of the world's entire military, that is. But they would solve it. I was sure of that. Which meant that my own work was more important with each passing day. Whenever the rest of the team had artificial consciousness ready, I would need to make sure it could interact with the custodian program itself and take control over its resources. It wasn't an easy task. The artificial mind would be a neural network, and the custodian was a clever yet traditionally structured computer program. Two paradigms that didn't mesh that well. My intention was to have the custodian work underneath the conscious level, as if it was some sort of reptilian brain, controlling the body's vital functions, except this body would be composed of military crafts, camera lenses, and 3D printing factories, rather than lungs, eyes, a heart, and... The door closed behind me. I turned to look at the newcomer, Emily, who was leaning against it with her arms crossed. "Oliver," she said, "tell me, you at least aren't happy with this." "Emily." "I don't understand it. We were supposed to save humanity, and now we are creating this
thing, this monster, and apparently I'm the only one who has a problem with it?
I shook my head. I know what you mean, Emily, I said. I really do, but you know it's true. We missed our train with the Ark. There's no way we could have fixed the scan problem and then went around town to town scanning people. Have you looked at what's going on out there? She sighed.
And how does this help anyone?
I looked back at the source code on the screen. It doesn't. Not really. It's just the Supreme Command throwing a Hail Mary.
What do you mean?
I shook my head. I mean they're desperate and think maybe this thing will trigger a technological singularity or something, saving what's left of us in the process. Doubtful, if you ask me. But even if it doesn't, maybe something of us will survive through it. My eyes drifted towards the pictures of my family that rested on the desk. And maybe it can bring justice. Retribution. It was that word, that concept that motivated me. The reason I was still working here, spending hours at a time submerged deep into the custodian's code. Sleepless, almost without eating any food, going to the bathroom only when I couldn't hold it anymore. I didn't care about the future, about humanity, not really. Not after losing my children. I knew I should. I knew that there was still some hope, faint as it was. But I just couldn't find it in me. Retribution? Justice? Vengeance? Yes, I could still care about those. And if we were making a monster like Emily said, I would go the extra mile to make sure it was the scariest, most powerful son of a bitch in the entire galaxy. I would give it all, if only for the sake of avenging their deaths.
So that's the plan, then, she was saying. We choose a scan at random out of the database, put it in control over the entire planet, and hope he or she knows what they're doing?
I let out a tired smile. No, the scans in the database are useless. They were done with the first encoding protocol. Too many inconsistencies. We will have to make a new one.
You just said we wouldn't go out.
She paused, her eyes going wide as she realized the true meaning of what I had just said.
You mean?
No, I nodded. Yes, it will have to be one of us.
Launched structural recovery process, nodes EC4A to EF22. Rebuilding local indexes. Propagating neural connections. Error. Could not reconnect node ED1F. Discarding node ED1F. Warning. This can result in permanent information lost. Structural recovery process completed with 1 error. I glanced at the people gathered in the break room, trying to judge their mental states, their worries, the problems each one had and tried to hide. Those I had discovered were the ones most dangerous. The project had always been more likely to derail due to interpersonal conflicts than to any technical issue. Emily, for instance, worried me. She was writing in her laptop, almost as if refusing to look at everyone else. I knew she hadn't taken the cancellation of the Ark initiative well. It had been her brainchild, after all. The idea of cheating death, of escaping the destruction of our planet by way of making a virtual refuge. It wasn't surprising Command had ended up pulling the plug on that. It had always been a secondary option, never receiving the same funds and resources the other projects had. The custodian, the new power plants, the drones, all of those projects had promised a victory, a practical result. None had delivered it. Emily, she was still collaborating with the group for the time being, but I knew just how easy it would be for that to come to an end. Oliver worried me in a different way. He had poured himself into his work, to an intensity I had never seen before in him. It was a huge red flag waving over his head, of course, but I found myself unable to restrain him, to tell him to take it easy. Because the sad truth was that we needed his work, desperately needed him to succeed. Andrew was Andrew. Annoying, maybe. But in a way, he was the easiest of them to deal with, the most predictable. As long as he had a technical problem to solve, he was content. Hannah seemed okay. She had taken well to working alongside Andrew, and they had been making huge strides lately. It was a good mix. Andrew was a genius with an incredible focus,
But Hannah had that out-of-the-box creativity, that counterintuitive spark that Andrew lacked. They complemented each other well, and she looked more optimistic now than she'd been since the attack started. I was happy for that, even if it meant she had less time to spend with me. In fact, she had a beaming smile plastered on her face right now. We've cracked it, she announced to the group as I entered the room and closed the door. Closing the door had become more of a ritual at this point. We were the only 5 people who still remained here, who had decided to keep working rather than leave and spend our last days with our respective families. What do you mean? I asked. We know how to make a viable artificial consciousness out of the scans, Andrew clarified. Everyone else perked up at that. The problem, Hannah said, was that we were focusing too much on preventing the holes in the scans. A few days ago, I realized that was a dead end. We weren't making any progress, so I asked myself if maybe there was a way we could fill out the missing parts instead. I talked it through with Andrew, and turns out we can. How? It was Emily this time. Simple, replied Andrew. The gaps follow a random distribution, different for each person, which means we can simply use a few scans from different people and overlay them into a single network. The missing parts in one scan are covered by the correct information in the other scans. The holes don't line up, so we can resolve it into a single, complete, viable combined scan. The missing parts in one scan are covered by the correct information in the other ones. The holes don't line up, so we can resolve it into a single, complete, viable combined scan. Our plan is to scan all 5 of us, said Hannah, still beaming, and use ourselves as the basis for the superconsciousness. A silence. Emily's mouth opened, and her eyes jumped from Hannah to Andrew, then back to Hannah. Are you 2 out of your bloody minds? She asked. Why? Hannah said. It'll work. This is like taking random pages out of 5 different books and mixing them all into one, Emily said. Then pretending the result will make any sense. It won't. It will be rubbish. Not necessarily, said Andrew. There are millions of ways to combine the networks. Some are rubbish, but others are much better. We only need a way to evaluate them all, and we can choose the best combination, the optimal. Which is where you come in, Emily, added Hannah. We need you to prepare a battery of psychological evaluation tests we can run past the candidate networks that tells us which one is the most stable. Hold on a second, interrupted Oliver. You said millions. How much time will it take to evaluate all those possible combinations? Andrew shrugged. More like billions. We can use an evaluationary algorithm, but it'll take a whole year, sure. Maybe more. Depends on the test we use. It doesn't matter. We will have to program the custodian to do it for us, given that we will all be dead in about 2 months tops. Everyone glared at him. What? I can't be the only one who noticed we aren't getting our weekly supply deliveries. What about humanity? What's the point of making this thing if there's nobody left to save by the time it wakes up? Asked Emily. Hannah shrugged. It's the only option we have. We'll have to cross our fingers and hope that enough people manage to find ways to survive until it's ready. But that's out of our hands. I looked at Oliver. Can the custodian be programmed to do this? He nodded. I think so, yes. And if it's going to take that long, I can set it to hibernate until it has chosen that perfect combination. It'll save power and hopefully stop the motherfuckers in orbit from noticing something is online down here and targeting it. Yeah, I guess it can be done. I nodded. What about you, Emily? She looked at me with fury, then at Andrew. There's no way I'm going to be part of any hive mind. It's not a hive mind, Andrew said. It'll be a single unified consciousness, just like you are still only one person, even if you have 2 brain hemispheres. The only difference is that it will have memories and personality traits from all of us. Oh, sorry, so you're not making a hive mind, you are just making a Frankenstein's monster. He paused a moment, then nodded. Yes, that would be a more appropriate metaphor. Buddy. And can you also make a therapist, Andrew? Because whatever thing comes out of that process is going to need one. It might experience what we could call a moderate psychological trauma, Andrew said. But I think the plasticity of the network will allow the consciousness to integrate the different personalities into one. It might need to discard or resolve conflicting memories, of course, specifically those with more than one perspective, such as our respective memories of these meetings, but... Emily looked at the rest of us, shaking her head. Okay, I know that Andrew doesn't get what's wrong with this, but what about you? When did you stop trying to preserve humanity and started trying to create monsters? This is still preserving humanity, Emily, said Hannah. Your memories, your personality will live on. No, speak for yourself, she said. I'd rather die a human than become that abomination. Then you'll die, said Andrew. "In 2 months or so." Emily took a step towards him, her right fist clenched and her mouth a thin line, but then turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door in her wake. "So, that went well." "Thank you, Andrew," I said. He shrugged. "Just stating the obvious."
"What about you, Eric?" Hannah asked me. "Are you in?"
I sighed. "Do you really think this is the best option?" She locked eyes with me.
"The best? No. The best would have been the Ark. But this is all we have now. This is the only way some of us will survive, and who knows? Maybe there will be other survivors. Maybe we can help them rebuild Earth once we become a superintelligence or something."
"Or avenge it," said Oliver, his eyes gazing at the empty table with a strangely absent expression. "All right," I said. "No promises, but let me talk to Emily first. I'll do my best to convince her."
Restarting process N-Cortex 7104. Pre-warming cache. Loading PB storage. Loading core networks. Structural sum check has changed. Performing psych eval test QV. Psych eval test QV. Failed. Score -17 under baseline. I stood in front of the closed door, wearing a green hospital gown. Even outside the room, I could already hear the faint buzzing noise coming from the machine inside. On one hand, I didn't want to enter. This was something I had promised myself I wouldn't do. A boundary I had set for myself, one that I was about to break. On the other hand, the air was cold and I wanted the door to open already. Get done with it and back into my own clothes. Hannah's voice came from behind the closed door. "Your turn, Emily."
At last, I opened the door and entered the room, not giving myself time to think twice about it, to chicken out. The scanner dominated the room. It was an enormous toroidal machine, not unlike those used in hospitals, with a central opening where the patient's table slid in. Except this one had open panels all around it, its electronic components exposed, wires hanging from its sides, connecting it to a multitude of electronic devices and computers. It seemed Eric had been making recent changes to it. Hannah sat behind the desk in the far corner of the room, hidden from view by 3 large computer screens. I was somewhat glad it was her and not Eric or Andrew here.
"You know the drill," she said. "No metal past the yellow line painted on the floor. And did you take the contrast?"
"Yes," I said.
"You do remember I wrote the patient protocols for these things, don't you?" Yeah, just dotting the I's. You can get on the table whenever you're ready."
"Sure," I said, approaching the scan table like one would a wild animal.
"Remind me again, why the hell did I agree to this?" I think you overheard we would be spending our digital afterlives with Andrew, and you couldn't face the idea of not being with him. Wasn't that it?"
I chuckled. I knew she was saying it just to make me relax, but it worked. Kind of. I silently thanked her as I climbed onto the table.
"The remote next to your right hand will stop the machine if you panic, but I'd rather you don't use it. We'd have to start over again, and it'd be a pain to reset everything, so just keep your eyes closed during the procedure if you're claustrophobic or something."
"You'd make one hell of a nurse, you know that, Hannah?" The table started sliding slowly into the machine. It felt like being devoured alive by a mechanical maw. I closed my eyes.
"Ha! Joke's on you. My mom was a nurse. I learned all my bedside manners from her."
The scanner started spinning, the noise intensifying, surrounding me, like having your head inside a washing machine.
"Hey, Emily?"
Hannah's voice sounded far away, muted by the wall of spinning electronics.
"Thank you for doing this. I know you had doubts, still have them, but becoming a superintelligence just wouldn't have had the same luster without you there too."
"No," I muttered, but she couldn't hear me. "It won't be us." As the machine spun, I tried to focus my mind on a single thought, a single idea. That of humanity, of being human. I knew it wouldn't make a difference, of course. The scan wouldn't be influenced by my current thoughts. No, it only recorded the deeper major structures of the brain, the patterns and connections that made me, me, that defined my personality, that stored my long-term memories. These very thoughts, they would be lost,
just like I never remembered the last thoughts I had right before falling asleep. But still, I focused all my attention into it, just in case, ignoring the now deafening noise, the vibrations my whole body felt, making sure that if something of me made it into the final mix, if something of me remained, it would be that idea. Human. I had to remember that. I had to remain human. It was important. Searching for alternative backups. Found. 0. Resuming load despite psych eval test QV error. Enabling I/O connectivity. Connecting neural network to PB storage. Connecting neural network to custodian interface. Restarting neural oscillation. N Cortex 7104. Reboot fully completed with 1 error. Alright, guys. That's going to be it for this one today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. Like, comment, subscribe if you can. I really do appreciate that. It helps me out a lot. And it allows me the opportunity to interact with you guys, which is always nice. So, I love you all. I hope you're having a terrific day. And I will see you in the next one, okay? But before I go, Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers? Or I guess if you're younger than that, let's see, SpongeBob or... What's another one? No, that's not like young enough. I don't know. I'm going to have to research because I used to babysit kids and I remember some of the things that happened like 10 years ago, but it's been a long time. Anyway, guys, just leave your favorite children's show from when you were a child in the comments. Bye, y'all.